Hello. I wanted to talk about it's probably your sixth week discussion about 9500 Liberty and also about some multicultural lesson plan ideas. I went over those in great detail, took notes. I decided not to just respond on an email, but I wanted to kind of glean some general ideas together because mostly a lot of times you probably found this, your students are a lot smarter than you are. And there's some great quotes, some great ideas. And so I wanted to share those with you. I'll probably do another video today for the 804 class, but I wanted to just, and I'm going to mention names, but nothing negative. It's all very positive. First of all, some of the ideas for multicultural lessons. And several of you, I know Andrea, you mentioned throw your tooth on the roof, which I actually happen to have that very book myself. Throw Your Tooth on the Roof. It's a great book. And by Selby Beeler. I have another book that's somewhere around here called On Your Mother's Back, and it's all about kids all over the world and how they're transported on their mother's back or whoever carries them, stroller or whatever. And this book is fabulous because you find out in here, and I'll show this again when I talk about books that I have, but it shows all kinds of rules about books. About teeth. In Malaysia, I bury my tooth because it is part of my body and needs to be returned to the earth. Indonesia, I throw my tooth backwards over the roof. My mother says I must throw it very straight so that my new tooth will grow straight. And so they don't put it under a pillow. And this goes on and on. In Australia, they put it under a pillow. But the Aboriginal Australians, native people that lived in Australia. My family helps me put my tooth inside the shoot of a pandanus plant so that when the pandanus grows into a tree, my tooth will grow too. There are spirits in the pandanus leaves that will look after me while my tooth is growing. Wow. So, and it talks about that. Some of you talked about celebrations. I have books on those. You can get a lot of mileage after. You think about it. You start out with the tooth, and then you talk about dental health, hook it into a science lesson for younger kids, talk about other traditions. And some of you mentioned, I know Andrea talked about you followed up Tooth on the Roof by a unit on family culture. And you do interviews with grandparents and talk about ancestors and things like that. Others, Alyssa, I think it's Allison or Alyssa Schuster, said to Alex, talk about exploring festivals and holidays. And I happen to have some books on that too. And this is Celebrations, Children All Over the World. This is kind of a UNICEF book. It has everything. It has Jewish holidays, Purim, and talks about ways that it's celebrated, and other ones, the Holi, which is a Hindu. Holi is a Hindu festival. It takes place in early March. That'd be right about now. And it's a beautiful book. And it's the one, I think, where they throw all kinds of colors all over the place because people have yellow and red and orange and pink and green. I know I've seen people do that, and they throw colors. Oh, yeah, and here they are. They can't even recognize them because down here they've thrown colors all over themselves. Thanksgiving's in here. Trong Thu, which is the mid-fall festival celebrating the beauty of the moon in Vietnam. Here's one in Sri Lanka, a Buddhist festival. Japanese festival in Osaka, Japan. Kokuk Barami, which is a holiday in Turkey. And summer festivals, and different types of summer festivals. This is a great book. and it's by Barnabas and Annabelle Kindersley, and it's called Children Just Like Me Celebrations. Also, I got one on birthdays. Alex, you mentioned using holidays to teach culture, inviting parents. So I'm mentioning this because I know maybe you didn't go through and read all of them, but there are all kinds of really cute and meaningful and useful and efficient ideas here. The suitcase lesson, Iris, you mentioned that. It's Sarah Hefrenick's lesson. And I actually put a note on here that I wanted to mention this. A few positives from Sarah Hefrenick. A few positive multicultural lessons that I would provide my kindergarten students to build character, acceptance, and intellectual curiosity toward other cultures. Intellectual curiosity. That's the whole point of learning. Get kids excited, get them engaged. They'll learn. There's no forcing. Learning about Christmases all over the world. But as I've said, there's celebrations of all kinds. There's summer celebrations all over the world. I have a curriculum that has 7 countries that students are able to learn and study Christmas traditions in. I introduce a country, read a story, or talk about how the traditions are different from ours. They do a writing lesson. They contrast customs. So you get reading, writing, listening, speaking. That's for ESL people. That's the essence. Of course, it is for any kind of lesson, but we want to get kids to communicate in many different ways. Then they collect materials over the course, and they create a fun suitcase as if they've been on a trip, and they take their little suitcase home. I'm sure you can make them out of cardboard, and then you can even get a little passport to fun or something. They can put their picture in there and get a sample like what a passport looks like, show them a real passport, and they can do that. So there's a lot of decorating here, and it can be very artistic project. I just love that. The suitcase, great idea. There's one here talking about Irish. You mentioned the quinceanera. I used to have a video on quinceaneras. That's a girl's 15th birthday, coming of age. And interesting on the celebrations on one of these, I'm going to have to look and see where it is. But on one of these, it talks about quinceaneras. In fact, I've got one really unusual. Native Americans, the gift of changing woman. And you probably think that's some mythic creature or something. It's actually, and here's this book is by, I think it's by Henry Holt & Company, New York. I'm sure it's changed, but the name is Van Ness Seymour. Seymour, Seymour is the last name. Van, Vanness is the middle name. I guess maybe that's all the last name. It's called The Gift of Changing Woman, an Apache story. And it's a beautiful book. You can see the illustrations in it. They have all the interesting characters. It look like antennae on there. Flying Saucer show my wife watched the other night. They were claiming all these things on the heads and the mysterious costumes they wear. These are because they saw aliens. They give no credit that people could actually have an imagination on their own. They have to see aliens. But this is about a girl coming of age in the Apache tribe. Think about that. Think what you could do with this. It's Native American. It has the Apache reservations in New Mexico, and very thorough. And I talk about multicultural books. You want them to be the real deal, you don't want Billy Bob that's been everywhere writing his version of what he thinks they're all like and relating them back to himself. This is a beautiful book. I really keep my eye on this so nobody steals it. I've had people take books. Isn't that awful? Stealing books. You don't see that as a crime much anymore. Anyhow, And then I've got another one that you talk about the Cinderella, and there's Turkey Girl, which is a Native American story of the Zuni tribe, who also are down there in the Southwest in northern Mexico. And so I like these kind of books because you can connect them to real life and to another tradition. That's the key. To teach multiculturally is not memorizing any facts or data and stuff like that, but it's literally to connect it to life itself. Makes it real. Some other things I wanted to bring up that I thought were really good in here. You can, by the way, you can get videos on the quinceanera, and it shows everything the girl goes through. If you're Hispanic and you know about the tradition, the young lady, this is a community celebration of her coming to age. It's like a sweet 16 party, but I would have to say it's far more involved. For instance, the girl may ask some teacher or someone they respect to help pay for their dress, and help pay, and different people, relatives or people will contribute. And they'll say, oh, I'm giving this as a gift, food, or I'm giving this as a gift. And you get, I remember seeing a bunch of young men that usually got in trouble in class. They had to go and practice, and they had to have 6 young men in tuxedos to dance with the quinceanera, the girl. And I thought it was so cool. I went to this, and it was a celebration. There were hundreds of people there. It was amazing, and all kinds of music, and we don't do this, and at least in the culture I'm from, in Missouri and stuff. I know debutante balls for very wealthy people, but I don't think about this as something that we do. And it's sometimes much bigger than a wedding, which is interesting. So thanks for these ideas. David, I think Sioux City, South Sioux City, you're talking about rodeos as a common thread. And rodeos are kind of Hispanic. You have the connection. You have the bullfighting, which is kind of there's an old celebration going back to the Roman gladiatorial combat, where people either fighting bears in England or fighting each other in a gladiatorial combat, or showing their strength against a wild animal. And most of you know the matadors. And one the other day, I think a couple of years ago, was killed in Spain. Young matador, bull got him with the horns right through the body and killed him. You read any Ernest Hemingway, you'd know Death in the Afternoon and all these things about Spain and men being men and fighting the bulls, etc. So David, you mentioned a rodeo, and there's a real common thread there. I remember somebody, and I don't know where it was, the rodeo, there were some complaints about this, the way the Mexican rodeo was done, because it was more bloody or something. I don't really remember what it was, but I remember it was like a PETA group that was, the idea of killing the bull, which they do kill the bull. You should see the win-loss thing. Of course, the matador can only lose once, because usually that's it. So he has to go like 200-0 lifetime. He has one loss or a tie, that might be the end of his job. David, you mentioned rodeos, quinceaneras, But I'm trying to think, if you look in these books and look at Hindu and Buddhism, you're going to find other coming of age ceremonies. And Adam, you made a quote, culture and ethnicity are not the same. And that's what we have to separate in people's minds, because, and I remember, I'll talk to it in a minute about something else, but Adam was talking about your stepfather was Japanese American, and about values you learn from him. And I think it's really important to realize that the culture's passed through teaching. It's not genetic, and it's certainly not ethnic. How many times have you seen somebody or they go up and say, well, don't you speak Spanish? Your name's Rodriguez. And they say, what are you talking about? You speak French, your name is Tracy. My name's French or Celtic or something, but it's not English. Um, by the way, I dressed up, so you can appreciate me. I don't wear a tie online, so. Allison, you talked about Allison Helms. You talked about Family Tree Project. And I want to mention something with this. I've seen projects where students actually have their hometown, like Lexington, Nebraska, and they have a thread going about where they moved from, like say from California or from El Salvador or wherever it is. Or you can go back with a different colored thread and do the grandparents. Did the grandparents go directly to Lexington with the parents, or did the grandparents go to, or great grandparents? You can go back and kind of in different threads, you can trace your family moving back in time over to another, to Europe or Asia or Japan or Korea. Very interesting. And then, of course, with two sets of parents, it gets really complicated. You have to decide about the colors of the thread. But it helps people see they're literally connected to the world, creates a web. I love the idea of the Family Tree Project. Of course, you get a lot of talk, go home research about your family. You have to be careful of those. Sometimes you get kids from maybe homeless or something. You got to think about any individual exceptions to that and how you might handle that. Cinderella stories, I've already talked about those. Hillary, Abigail, Andrea, and Sarah mentioned. Now, I want to talk a little bit about something. I'm going to talk a little about the 9500 Liberty too in a minute, but this is important. If you remember a guy named Carl Jung, Jung, he was a Sigmund Freud's one of the people that followed Sigmund Freud and then created his own version of psychiatry, psychology, different theories. Carl Jung is very interesting. I had a book around here, used to, I don't know where I put it, but there are things called archetypes, Types. Archetypes are reoccurring symbols or reoccurring patterns in culture. You find something similar in most or all cultures. I won't say all, but for example, we all have a mother and a father. So you have a father figure, a mother figure. You can study Joseph Campbell. If you ever want to look at that, he deals with the hero, the cycle of the hero from the Iliad and the Odyssey. We all go on a journey and we have parents and we go away from our home and we go to the underworld or to the world outside of our womb or the world outside of our county or another country. And we are changed. We go those places and we learn things and we go on an adventure. He calls it an adventure. It could be as simple as a trip to the grocery store that really changes your life. Well, usually that's not very life-shaking. But it could also be that you go on a mission trip somewhere, or you go, a lot of people in Nebraska do that, or you go in the military and it changes who you are. It changes the kind of person you are. Not all adventures are going to end well. There's a risk. See, here's the thing about it, there's a risk. And so when you go on this adventure, it may not come out well, but that's what life is. It's about exploring and learning intellectually and physically moving about and learning all those things. Well, the idea of an archetype is that it's a pattern. And if you look in different tribes and stuff, the archetype of Cinderella or the girl who is rescued or something, the white knight in shining armor, we've always had that kind of idea around. Now people are going against that. Women rescue themselves. They don't need a man to rescue them or going into a different adventure. You don't need that particular kind of help. But it can be the trickster. And the trickster is someone, a lot of times in some cultures, Native American, the fox or coyote is a trickster. And they actually see it as evil. He's trying to do things, is going to cause trouble. In 9500, the guy Greg, that really gets everybody agitated. I see him as the trickster. Not all of you saw him that negatively. Some of you saw him very negatively. I'm more of the opinion of that. But I see society like that. And bigger, we see forces, and we see politics, or we see individuals who offer something that seems great, and then we go and find out it's not so great. Biblically, we're talking about Satan or the devil, when Christ is up on the wherever he is above the building, and the devil says, or whoever's tempting him, I assume the devil, says, hey, if you'll just worship me, I will give you all the world. Or if you'll throw yourself down, let me see your angels come and save you. So prove yourself to me if you're Jesus. So that's the trickster. That's the person who tries to divert you from a positive life. And so I could teach whole lessons on this. I do in one class, but the idea is that it could be also the mother figure. There's always a mother. There's a grandmother and her great-grandmother and your mother, and you become a mother. And sometimes a single parent becomes mother and father. They have to nurture both in every way they can. They're able to. So these archetypes exist in all different ways, but they're organized patterns, and they do exist. They're real. I just talked about them when I talked about the tooth on the roof. That's a little adventure. What do you do with your tooth? And you give it to somebody. I know in Hispanic culture, I know Mexican, they talk about el raton, the mouse comes up and gets a tooth from under your pillow. And I don't know about you, I once had a mouse on my pillow chewing on my ear while I was asleep in Oklahoma. That is a very uncomfortable thought. So if you told me as a child that a mouse is going to crawl in bed with me, that's not going to be something I'm going to be a part of. So anyhow, so I wanted to mention these. Some other comments. I mentioned intellectual curiosity. I think Rick was talking. Rick Goodjohn. I'm sorry. Not like I only have to type them when I'm talking, but Rick, you're talking to Alyssa, and you mentioned some things in your reply. And this gets more to 9500 Liberty, I think, but it was about the idea behind civil discourse is to be able to see and understand an opposing view and respect opinions regardless of one's own position. This skill is disappearing. As a teacher, we must nurture debate, even in topics that seem to be simple or cut and dry to us. That is what the development of culture and cultural identity forms from. That's a magnificent quote. Should have been written in a textbook. Oh, it's better than a textbook. But you also said before, I think it reflects on us and our sensibilities. It's difficult to listen to people we feel so greatly disagree with. I'll just let it play. Three Stooges. I'm almost done. Now, but people that we disagree with, observing from a third position, it's always easier to see more clearly. It's easy to see a defined line of opposition. When you get on one side or the other, you don't see the other person. This is really huge, and it's in this class. And I will sometimes make political innuendo or statements, but I have my own set of views, and you have to defend your own. But the key in multicultural is try to find ways to move people so they're willing to listen. They don't have to agree with you at all, but just listen. I'm really perturbed nowadays. I see people that don't listen at all. They just shut me down or they attack before I even get the words out of my mouth. And you see it on everything on on Twitter, on political arguments on TV, you see this one-sidedness. You're either left or right. I saw this coming 30 years ago. Used to have a thing called Point Counterpoint. It was actually a TV show, and they would argue back and forth. And it wasn't for a purpose. It was for the purpose of basically almost getting personal. But it was just meaningless argument. There's no rules where you say that, could I persuade you if I gave you this argument? Whether it was on something as emotional as abortion, or on aid to the to poor people, healthcare, what to do about injustice in the world, where we should intervene in other countries, how we should treat our veterans when they come back home, the military, how we should talk about respect for symbols of our country, flag, Pledge of Allegiance, national anthem, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're getting the point where, it's not just enough to say we agree to disagree. We have to keep talking. Okay, I know you get tired of talking, but I find mostly on television, I turn it on and it's just blabber. It's just constant shifting back and forth like the ocean, but there's no structure to it. And there's no attempt to reach, I don't see progress reaching a conclusion. And that's why we have things like debate and civil discourse, that we don't put passion in it. What I found interesting on 9500 Liberty, some of you mentioned this, is with the guy Greg, and I can't say his last name, Latigue, I guess, is that you notice how he just dismissed anybody that had an opposing argument. He just shook his head very condescendingly. Well, we know what they are. They're basically either traitors, or they're uninformed, or they're just they're politically extreme. I dismiss them. Now that's where I think democracy breaks down. I think it breaks down when we dismiss people. We say, I don't want to hear you anymore. We tend to have this two-party system in our country, and I think that's a real unfortunate thing. Now we're seeing that when there's not enough consensus, it doesn't work very well. A lot of people made fun of parliaments, but they do have to form a government. They have to negotiate. You can't just say, well, we'll just let the government go to hell because we can't get together. But that was just my little idea, that I felt that our founders weren't so wise. They didn't take into account that political parties must form. That's how people share their interests and promote things. So anyhow, I just wanted to mention that. I thought that was a really good quote from Rick. And also, a lot of you praised the police chief. Can't think of his name. Dean, the police chief. I remember the first name. Some of the people that were persistent, there was one lady, and I can't think of her name in the video. She kept coming up and giving her 2 cents, brought her kid on her hip and said, this is what I believe. Nobody paid attention, but she always showed up. She was persistent in allowing herself to be ignored, but she was there. Because when you say, I'm not going to vote, I'm not going to do anything, I'm just going to go home and be quiet, that's when really bad things happen, because no one's paying attention. I thought Sarah had a very good, Sarah Hevernick had a really good reply here. A few positive multicultural lessons I could provide. I'm sorry. I'm getting really at it. There it is. It wasn't Sarah, sorry. It was Alyssa. Latigue would fall under the stage of defense in regard to the stages of intercultural awareness. Latigue would be in the stage where he is able to only see the differences between immigrants of his community and himself. Due to only seeing differences, he forms a negative opinion of immigrants in his community, established through his blog, Help Save Manassas, in an us versus them mindset. Those are the pronouns you have to look for. It's us versus them. Those are tiny words, but deadly words. If I were to encounter Lateef, I would oppose him. I would do this through active participation in town meetings, as well as attending group events against proposed laws, than in the video. I would identify and share the misinformation that Lateef would publish on his blog, as well as become an advocate for the committee. And another person, which I put it down, I'll see if I got it in my notes. Kristen, you said I would not go on Greg's website and fight him. And I agree, because he has the power there. And if you look at his website, it's kind of dark, fear inducing, So I think that's something that's very important for you to consider. And that we have a democracy, and and you have to insist that opposing viewpoints be given their time. It doesn't mean they're right, and it doesn't mean they won't be criticized. People can't say, that A is here to present their opinions, and I support the right to give their opinions, but A is either a bad person or is not very informed or is ignorant. And that's where things are going now. It's getting ugly. It's strictly personal now, name calling, and you've seen it. I won't have to name people and who does that, but it's getting to where it's pretty common. People just curse each other, intimidate each other, etc. But I believe there is something called a good way to do it. And I believe some people are teaching us some very bad habits in this country. They're very destructive. And that's where you have to think. You have to think, what is it that we can come with positive from this conflict? Now, I have something that I may show this class. It's called Study Circles. And I have all this material on it, and I won't make it required, but I'll offer it to you. It is a way to persuade people to get together in a group and to make sure that nobody is the big shot in the group. I've actually been to these. We did this twice in Lexington. You get people in a group from all over the community, including even middle school kids, high school principals, mothers that don't speak English and have a translator there to represent their views. And you invite and get this nice batch of people, get some snacks. It's all very positive. We're not there to say, well, we're here to talk about immigration. No, you don't have a topic. You get them in the group. I know I'm just telling you this on the fly, but you get them in the group, and then what you do is you say, what do you think are issues that our community has to deal with? And the rule is it has to be something that can be dealt with in that group or within the community. So you can't say, I want to change the immigration laws, or I want to impeach somebody, or I want to have the police do something that may be extra legal or requires the government or the federal or state government to do something. You have to do something that can be accomplished that will help the community or help the school, and do it. And I can give you examples. In Lexington, one of them was a welcome center for immigrants, because people would come into town in Lexington, they didn't know where to go, and they didn't speak English, or they didn't know the town. And what was interesting, it wasn't just immigrants, it was any newcomers to the town, especially people that were poor and didn't have access or didn't know. At that time, a lot of people didn't have computers. So they didn't know how to go about finding out, where do I rent a house? Or am I paying too much rent? Or, is somebody going to rip me off? Or where do I go for groceries? Or if I don't have a health insurance, where can I go and have my baby seen if my baby has a high fever? Can that be done? Is there anyone that will even help me? And it's basically being good neighbors. And they actually started and got it funded through a combination of churches and other groups, a welcome center. So people are helped when they come in the community. A lot of people identify it with immigrants or migrants as, we talk about, well, there's certain people go there, but actually anybody can go there. It's just information. Now, a lot of people would say, well, the Chamber of Commerce isn't open at odd times, and it doesn't, it's kind of promoting the city. It's more, it is not it's not some kind of a place that just helps someone who's totally homeless find a place to stay at night, or can get a little money or find a church or has some connections where people can get help. So I wanted to bring that up because we did that. It's called Study Circles Everyday Democracy, I believe is the website. Now, if anybody mentions that to me that they want to know about that, I'll provide those materials. I will not teach that as part of the class, although a little version of it's quite interesting. But I like it because it's pure, it's kind of a pure form of democracy. Because when we did this study circle project, the people that were like the superintendent, the principals, the mayor, they got so much time to speak and then they had to shut up. They didn't get to run the agenda. They didn't get to go and run for office in that group because there'd be a little lady that no one's ever heard from who doesn't speak English, and she'd have a translator and she'd be just as important as the mayor. And it really kind of ticked off some of those people. I mean, the mayor we happen to have is great in Lexington, but some of the other people, I remember a superintendent, once they saw that they weren't going to be running the show, they kind of disappeared. It's quite interesting. They call that deference. Used to be at a class, it was called democracy or deference. Washington was president because of deference, because they said, well, he led the Revolutionary Army, he's a great leader, he looks the part, we'll make him president. But then we started electing people, and then it got political, and that's what politics is. You don't just get elected because you look good, So what I would say to you is take a look at this, and I'll still mention a little bit. I think it'd be interesting. Imagine it teaches democracy, and it teaches that you have to be reasonable. You can't go in there hacking away, because if you get angry in the study circle, you just look stupid. You look like a person who's, we're all sitting around nice and you just get angry. And usually, especially in Nebraska, getting angry is not a very good way doesn't impress people. Yelling around and being emotional and stuff, it doesn't sell itself. And I love this format because it just cuts that off. And you know what? What was cool is the people running the study circles were high school students. They were not adults as we normally think of them. It teaches them to be responsible, and it teaches citizenship. It's a wonderful thing. And it's not political, because you have to deal with issues. You don't get to take all kinds of ideological views. You have to be practical. Okay. I think that's about all I have to say on this. One last thing, and I was real impressed with Adam when you talked about a couple of you, actually. Derek mentioned this, that the ISO Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, was founded by a Japanese gentleman, or maybe military guy, who taught Japanese to Americans during World War II, because they had to have it for combat or dealing with Japanese civilians, or definitely soldiers. And I was impressed with that. And then following on that, because I talked to Adam on the phone, he made the statement that about his cultural values a lot of them were Japanese American cultural values. Cultural values are not genetic, they're taught. Just like, I think when maybe it's him, said culture is not ethnicity, that Japanese values, American values, have so much in common. And then I want to add my quote to that, because it was a good kind of follow through there, is that in order to teach understanding for another culture, just remember this. This is my quote. your students have to find beauty in that culture in order to respect it and to honor it, and to learn about it and to be curious. If you People that deride other cultures and tell about how inferior they are, or make some statement about what kind of country they are, well, they're just a bunch of such and such countries. They don't see the beauty. They don't see. You might find it in art, music. You might find it in clothing, religion. You might find it in the way people conduct themselves, or the way they organize, or the language. I happen to love French language. I think it's beautiful. Um, I like Greek, the history of Greece, the art. Now it's more ancient Greece, you know, but and 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 what they contributed to our society. With the Irish, it's persistence, it's the music, and it's really nice to do this because you think African American culture. You know, typically people say jazz, or they'll say, I see great actors, great stories. I say incredible persistence going through the history of slavery and the civil rights era and the continuing issues that people don't want to talk about, you know, whether it's Trayvon Martin and injustice, and individuals that speak up. And obviously in our culture, individuals are those who are almost invisible. When they speak up, that people get upset with them, you know. Yeah, it depends on the way you speak up. I know some people don't like the kneeling at the national anthem. We're not saying you have to stand for it, but that people say, I don't respect that. You should. Now, my personal view is that I don't think showing, if I'm seen as showing disrespect to something that other people respect, I don't think that's going to build my case. Um, Protests have to be really focused, okay? So I don't agree with that. But there are people that become actors, and you know, Morgan Freeman. My gosh, he's in everything. He's in every Clint Eastwood movie and about every other movie. It seems like there's an older man. He's in Batman. He's in Glory, the Civil War movie. He's everywhere. He's almost like America's father in a way, you know, or wise old man. But you have to see beauty in the culture. And I think Adam, when he was talking about Japanese American culture and talked about those values, and I talked with him, I was so impressed. There's similar things that I like about Japanese culture: the sense of order, the beauty, the structure, the way the culture, all I can say is my perception of politeness, the avoidance of conflict. You know, Americans, we're not very good at that, you know. But whatever culture we look at, if you don't learn to love things in it, then there's going to be problems, and you got to look for the beauty in it. So I'm just going to harp on that, okay? And because I don't know, I don't have it now, but there used to be an old, oh gosh, it's very old, and you can find it on the internet. It talks about all the little things in our culture that come from somewhere else. You know, Turkish towels. You know what a Turkish towel is? You know, our bath towels, the way they're made, that's from Turkey. Where soap came from. Our bathrooms, our automobiles. Americans didn't invent everything, or if they invented something, it might have been an American. You know, the Russian invented was very important in the creation of helicopters. Germans and rockets, and engines, and technology, physics. You know, so much that comes from other cultures. You can't look at your culture and say, this is my culture and it's nice and pure. It's it's threaded with everything else. Okay, I try to shut up. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope it's not too long.